Time for another story. Um, so I've been thinking about heroes lately, and there is a story in the Magic Garden that is taken out of the Bible, and it's about David, who lived an amazing life, mainly because he was so brave and he had so much faith in his God. Um, so some of the words in this story might not make sense, and I don't even know them all. That's okay. But I think it can be very inspiring to hear about people facing incredible odds and doing it because they feel that it's the right thing to do, not because of any gain. And David left a legacy of the Psalms, which are poetry in the Bible that we still memorize and find inspiration from. So he is a fantastic example of taking really scary, difficult situations and alchemizing them into something wonderful. All right, so here goes. Now Saul was king in Israel, but Saul did evil. So Samuel the high priest came no more to see Saul. Samuel went unto Jesse the Bethlehemite to anoint from among his sons one who should be king after Saul's death. And Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel. And Samuel looked on the eldest, a young man so tall and stately that Samuel said, Surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said unto Samuel, Look not on his countenance, nor on the height of his stature, for the Lord seeth not as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. Then Samuel said unto Jesse, Are all thy children here? And Jesse said, There remaineth yet the youngest. Behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Jesse sent and fetched David, a ruddy lad, fair of face. And the Lord said unto Samuel, Anoint him, for this is he. So Samuel took a horn of oil and anointed David to be the king after Saul. Then David returned to his flocks. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him from that day forward. He looked on the light of the morning, when the sky is without a cloud, and the whole world seemed to him to skip, to sing, to shout for joy of God, its Maker. Then there came a lion and took a lamb out of his flock. And David said, It is God that girdeth me with strength. And he caught the lion by his beard, and slew him, and delivered the lamb. And there came a bear likewise, and took a lamb. And David smote the bear also, and delivered the lamb from his mouth. And God seemed to David like a good shepherd, ever guarding his people, as a shepherd guardeth his flocks. And he sang in confident trust, The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from King Saul, and he was troubled with madness. So his servant said unto him, Command us to seek out a cunning player upon a harp, for when the frenzy is on thee, he shall play, and thou wilt be well. Then Saul heard say that David, son of Jesse, played well. So he sent unto Jesse and said, Send me David thy son. And Jesse laded an ass with bread and a bottle of wine and a kid, and sent them by David unto Saul. And when the frenzy was upon Saul, David played before him fresh and innocent music, full of his trust in God and joy in his creation. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the madness departed from him. Now in those days the Philistines came against Saul. They stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath, a giant, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. I have no idea how big that is, but I'm guessing it was pretty big. And he had a helmet of brass on his head and greaves of brass on his legs, and he was armed with a coat of mail. And one bearing a shield went before him. And Goliath cried to the armies of Israel morning and evening for 40 days, saying, Choose ye a man that he may come down unto me. If he kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I kill him, then shall ye be our servants. I defy the armies of Israel this day. And Saul and his host were greatly afraid. Now the 3 eldest sons of Jesse followed Saul to the battle. Therefore David stayed home to keep his father's sheep. But Jesse said unto David, Take thou an ephah of corn and 10 loaves, and run to the camp to look how thy brethren fare, and carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000. So David went. He came to the place of wagons as the host was going forth, shouting to the battle. Leaving his baggage with the keeper of the baggage, he ran to the army to salute his brethren. And behold, there came up the giant, Goliath of Gath, and all the men of Israel fled. But David said, Who is this Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? Then Eliab, David's brother, cried, Why camest thou hither, and with whom hast thou left thy sheep? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart. Thou art come to see the battle. But Saul, hearing how boldly David had spoken, summoned the lad to his tent. And David said unto Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of this Philistine. Thy servant will go and fight him. And Saul said unto David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine, for thou art but a youth, and he is a man of war. But David said, The Lord that delivered me out of the paws of a lion and a bear, he will deliver me from this Philistine. Then Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with thee. So Saul armed David with his own coat of mail and with his sword. But David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And he took them off, and put the sword away, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook. And he put the stones in his shepherd's bag, and his sling was in his hand. And the Philistine drew near, and the man that bore the shield went before him. And Goliath disdained David, because he was but a youth, ruddy and fair of face. And he cursed David by his gods, and cried, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. Then said David to the giant, Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's. And David ran to meet the Philistine. He put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in the forehead. And behold, the Philistine fell flat on his face to the earth. And David ran, and drew the Philistine's sword, and cut off his head. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they arose and fled, and Israel pursued them. Then Saul was mightily pleased with David. He took the youth that day to dwell in his house. And Saul's son Jonathan loved David as his own soul, and he made a covenant with him. He stripped himself of his robes, and of his bow, and of his girdle, and of his sword, and he gave them to David. Thereafter David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. So Saul set David over his men of war, and all Israel and Judah loved David. But it came to pass, when David and Saul returned from battle, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet them. And the women sang, Saul has slain his thousands. And then they sang still more joyously, still more loudly, and David has slain his 10,000s. Then Saul was very wroth, and he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. What can he have more but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David with jealousy from that day forward. And when the madness came on him, he cast a javelin to smite David. But Jonathan pleaded with his father for David, and Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. So Saul took David back into his favor, and gave him Michal to be his wife. But in time there was war again, and David went out and fought with the Philistines, and they fled from him. Then Saul's jealousy returned. He sat sulking, darkly brooding, in his house with his javelin in his hand. And when David came to him in friendship, with all dutiful obedience, Saul sought to smite him even to the wall with the javelin. But David slipped away, and Saul smote the javelin into the wall. Then David fled home to Michal his wife. But Saul sent messengers unto his house to lie in wait and slay him in the morning. And Michal said unto David, Save thyself tonight, or tomorrow thou shalt be slain. And Michal let David down through a window, and he fled. And Michal took an image of the stone, and laid it in David's bed, and covered it with cloth. And when Saul's messengers came, they found only the image in the bed. Then Saul was wroth with Jonathan because of his friendship with David, and he cast a javelin at Jonathan, crying, Thou son of a perverse, rebellious woman, 'tis to thy hurt and that thou hast David for thy friend. For while he liveth thou shalt not be king. But Jonathan loved David, and thought not of himself. And David returned no more to court, but dwelt in the cave of Adullam. And everyone that was in distress, or discontented, or in debt, gathered themselves unto him, almost 400 in number, and he became captain over them. And David went to the place where there was the sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom he had slain, and he took that sword for his sword. Then David and his men saved the town of Keilah from the Philistines, who robbed the threshing floors. But the very men he had saved sought to betray him. They told Saul that David was in Keilah. So David and his men fled and hid themselves in the wood, in a mountain in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day. But Jonathan went to David to comfort him in the wood. And he said, Fear not, thou shalt be king over Israel, and I will be second to thee. Then the men of Ziph would have delivered David unto Saul, but David went up from thence and dwelt in the wilderness of En-gedi. And Saul took 3,000 chosen men, and went to seek David on the rocks of the wild goats. And many a time in those days the heart of David was sad, and he cried for sorrow. They that hate me without a cause are more than the hairs on mine head. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Yet his confidence returned in time, and he sang in bolder wise, The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Though an host though a host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. And Saul came to the sheepfolds where there was a cave, and he went in and lay down. And David and his men were hiding in the innermost parts of the cave. And the men said unto David, Behold, thine enemy is in thine hands. Do to him as seemeth good unto thee. Then David arose and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe. But his heart smote him for what he had done, and he suffered not his servants to rise against Saul. For he cried as Saul went out of the cave, My lord, the king. And when Saul looked back, David said, Wherefore hearest thou men's words, saying, David seekest my hurt? Look, my father, see, the skirt of thy robe is in my hand. I cut off thy skirt, but killed thee not, and yet thou huntest my life. Then Saul said, Is this thy voice, my son David? Thou art more righteous than I, for thou hast rewarded me good for evil. And he lifted up his voice and wept. But David and his men gat them up again to their strongholds and abode in the wilderness. They lurked in the woods and hid themselves in high hills, where there was a wild goat's refuge and the crag with the eagle's nest. And they dwelt in caves, companions only to shepherds, who kept their sheep in the wilderness. Neither stole they aught from the shepherds, for they asked their food of rich husbandmen when they held a sheep-shearing feast, or they were fed by some good women, coming with a train of asses, bearing bread and meat, raisins, wine, and figs. Now in those days Samuel the high priest died. Then Saul came again, following after David as one doth hunt a partridge. But David crept into Saul's camp by night, and came where Saul lay sleeping. And he took the spear that stood on the ground by the side of Saul, and the cruse of water at his head. Then he stood on the top of a hill, far off, and called, Now see where the king's spear is, and the cruse of water that was at his head. And Saul knew David's voice, and cried, I have sinned. Return, my son David. I will no more do thee harm. But David knew Saul meant to kill him. So he fled to the Philistines, whom Saul feared. And Saul sought no more for him. Then the Philistines came again to give battle unto Israel, and when Saul saw their host, he was sore afraid. And he disguised himself and went to the witch of Endor, a woman who dealt in magic, such as one as God has commanded Saul to put away out of the land. And Saul bade the witch to call up the ghost of Samuel, who was dead, that he might inquire of Samuel concerning the fate of Israel. And he saw, as it were, the appearance of Samuel, saying, Tomorrow the Lord will deliver Israel into the hands of the Philistines, and thou and thy sons shall die. Then Saul fell to the earth. There was no strength left in him. And the battle went sore against Saul, and the men of Israel fled. And the Philistines followed hard after Saul, and they slew Jonathan and the other 2 sons of Saul. And the archers hit Saul, and he was sore wounded. Then said Saul to his armor-bearer, Draw thy sword, and thrust me through. But his armor-bearer would not. So Saul took a sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise on the sword and died. And the Philistines found Saul and his sons fallen in Mount Gilboa. And they cut off Saul's head and put it in the temple of Dagon. And they stripped off his armor and put it in the house of Ashtoreth. And they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. Now at this time David was off in the desert fighting marauders who rode swift camels and had burned the city where he lived. And when he returned in triumph, there came unto him a man who had escaped from the camp of Saul. And he fell on the earth before David and cried, Saul and Jonathan are dead. Then David rent his clothes and said, How are the mighty fallen? I am distressed for thee, my brother Jonathan. Thy love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. Thereafter David returned to his own homeland, and men gathered unto him and made him king in a place of Saul. The end.